Grendel, that sounds ominous. Welcome. Trying something new tonight. Can't do the video anymore. Grendel, that sounds ominous. On X, they want you to pay. Welcome. So I'll do the spaces. If you want the good stuff, that is the visual, I'm also streaming on YouTube. I have the link in the comment section on. Can't do the video anymore. Twitter. Grendel, that sounds ominous. On X, they want you to pay. Welcome. So I'll do the spaces. If you want the good stuff, that is the visual, I'm also streaming on YouTube. Now they can see my face. Twitter. Oh, there were 4 people. Now there's only 1 watching on YouTube. YouTube's a much harder environment, as you can imagine. I tried Tuesday night. I had some technical difficulties, but now they can see my face. Oh, there were 4 people. Now there's only 1 watching on YouTube. YouTube's a much harder environment, as you can imagine. Well, I'll have it recorded and people can listen to it later if they want. I tried Tuesday. So here goes nothing. Good evening. I'm Pastor Sean Mathis from Providence OPC in Denver, Colorado. Every week or so I run a live stream on X. Well, now it's going to be Spaces. I can't do live stream unless I cough it up the money. And now I can do YouTube live stream. If you like to do that, you can actually see what I'm seeing on the computer. I'll show quotes. I'll show my book. I'll show website pages and whatnot. And I offer my opinions and observations and encouragement during these trying times. These episodes are of my own making and of good faith, and any errors are mine alone. I finally want to start talking about the hot topic of Christian nationalism, only because a pastor in a sister denomination wrote a thought-provoking article earlier this week on the matter. Although the essay was specifically about establishment laws as well as suppressing heresies and reforming the church, yet there is much more to the relationship between church and state, or more broadly, as our church and national founders wrote on the issue, they called it religion and state. They meant Christianity, perhaps the broadest being deism. Religion is certainly very broad and broader than the church as an organization that is conceived as an institution, as people typically talk about it these days. So I would like to illuminate key points to show that the confession and its authors did not intend to support the current state of affairs, but to maintain the social and political world they found themselves in at the end of the 18th century. Religion is certainly very broad and broader than the church as an organization that is conceived as an institution, as people typically talk about it these days. In other words, the current relationship between religion and the state is substantially different from theirs. Up to this time, I was writing and promoting my book, Is the Church Pro-Gay? And you can see that to my right. It's about the pressing matter of the queer agenda being shoved down our throats, even in the churches. We cannot have a Christian nation of any shape if we cannot keep the churches pure in this regard. Yet Christian nationalism, as much attention as it garners on social media, is more abstract and a future dream that I won't see in my lifetime. Gays are already in the church, even as Pastor DeYoung denomination. He has an ex-PCA pastor, Greg Johnson. He testifies about that denomination. Yet Christian nationalism, as much attention as it garners on social media, the quote here. More abstract and a future dream that I won't. So there we have it. There are plenty of pastors and elders in my denomination, he said just before he left, who are not public about being gay. This is where we find ourselves. He testifies about that denomination. Now, because Christian nationalism, air quotes, 2 kingdoms, and separation of church and state can be used in so many ways, those concepts and words, I simply want to review the then current laws and teachings and practices of our church fathers to show that they were closer to the British and Scottish brothers of 1646 than many seem willing to admit these days. And I think 2 particular laws would help paint the kind of world our fathers lived in. That would be the Sabbath and the blasphemy laws. Up to the time of the war, quote, most, if not all, of the colonial legislatures had passed laws restricting secular labor and unnecessary travel, end quote, on Sundays. In the early 1800s, when Congress directed the postmaster to continue mail services on Sunday, for example, all the major denominations, Congregational, Lutheran, Methodist, Episcopalian, Baptist, and Presbyterian, responded with vigorously to the new law with, quote, the first bombardment of Congress with petitions in the cause of Sunday observance. Claim by Congress was over its necessity during the time of war, for example, 1812, while the churches disagreed at the time. The body of the Presbyterian Church consistently argued against Congress upon the following grounds, and you have the quote before you if you're on YouTube. We hold as important maxims never to be lost sight of that without the Sabbath there will be no religion, and without religion there will be no morality, and that where morality, sound and correct morality, ceases to form the basis of the public manners, the strongest bonds of society are dissolved, and nothing is to be expected but mutual jealousy and hatred, and with all the crimes and miseries to which this painful and disordered state of things will lead. I think we certainly see that in this generation. The assumption was that this American republic could only stand by civil virtue, which itself was required godly religion, specifically Christianity. This is what they were thinking and practicing and believing at the time when they wrote our confession. Earlier in the 1780s, Madison and Jefferson, the very paragons of church and state separation, or so we're told, pushed for a Sunday bill. And you can see that here. It's called a Bill for Punishing Disturbers of Religious Worship and Sabbath Breakers, 18 June 1779, by Madison and Jefferson. If any person on Sunday shall himself be found laboring at his own or any other trade or calling, or shall employ his apprentices, servants or slaves in labor, or other businesses, except it be on the ordinary household offices of daily necessity, or other works of necessity and charity, he shall forfeit the sum of 10 shillings. Can you imagine living in that time period? That's really something else. That's good to know you guys are hearing me. Thank you for joining, Tommy. Come lately. You did come lately, but you came. That's great. I'm going over two important laws to show that the Westminster Confession of Faith had much more in common with our forefathers than they do with us in many regards. And so their expectations of society and the relationship with the church is built upon this certain assumption that we would have a Christian society and Christian laws and expectations. So we have here the Sabbath laws of Madison and Jefferson that was eventually passed in 1785. And so it was 1789 that we have the writing of the Westminster Confession of Faith, the American edition. But these are the expected laws and practices across all the colonies with respect to the Lord's Day. As for the states and their relationship to the church, the New Jersey Constitution shows a relationship that is more complex than many would let on. As we read, for example, in the TGC article, we read here, in 1776, this is DeYoung, the New Jersey Provincial Congress, which included John Witherspoon, approved the new state constitution. While the Constitution restricted office holdings to Protestants, it vigorously defended religious freedom and opposed religious establishments. Article 18 of the Constitution, they approved prohibited church establishments, and it does, and you have the full quote here. If you've read the article, or you can take my word for it, you can find these things on your own. That no person shall ever within this colony be deprived of the inestimable privilege of worshiping God Almighty in a manner agreeable to the dictates of his own conscience. Note, they are assuming people are going to do this, nor under any pretense whatsoever compelled to attend any place of worship, contrary to his own faith and judgment, nor shall any person within this colony ever be obliged to pay taxes, titles, or any other rates for the purpose of buildings, repairing any church or churches, places or places of worship, etc., maintenance of the ministry, and the like. Yes, he quotes that. That's what he wants to highlight. That's what he wants to emphasize. Yet, disallowing church establishment is not the same thing as promoting a secular society or state, as the remainder of the New Jersey Constitution itself indicates. We already saw the Sabbath laws, which continued in New Jersey with their new Constitution. In the next article of the Constitution at the time, Article 19 of the New Jersey, that he could have easily quoted, he alluded to it, but it's important that we read it here. It's significant because it's glossed over in that article. It reads, let me scroll up here for those on YouTube, that there shall be no establishment of any one religious set in this province in preference to another, and that no Protestant inhabitant of this colony should be denied. Oh, sorry. I got ahead of myself. Here it is. That it's 21. Significant because it's glossed over in that article. It reads. No, I was reading the right one. And that no Protestant inhabitant of this colony shall be denied the enjoyment of any civil right merely on account of his religious principles. No Protestant. Doesn't say anybody else. Right? No Protestant inhabitant of this colony should be denied the enjoyment of civil rights. And so the Protestants believed in the Lord's Day, the Sabbath, Sunday laws, and thus they had them for until the 50s, in fact, I believe, in New Jersey. But that all persons professing a belief in the faith of any Protestant sect who shall deem themselves peaceably, or act peaceably under the government as hereby established shall be capable of being elected into any office of profit or trust or be a member of either branch of the legislature. I don't believe DeYoung would agree with this. I don't think anybody this day agrees with this amongst the big names. I'm comfortable with this, but I don't think I'm going to see this in my lifetime. Witherspoon, more importantly, was comfortable with this. He helped write their Constitution. This is what he's trying to drive at. Look, Witherspoon was involved in this, and a bunch of Presbyterians, and they're pushing against the establishment. And so the implication seems to be, I'm not sure though, that this is what we should have today, a secular approach to things, and yet the next article, Article 19, says, no, only Protestants, sorry. More importantly, was comfortable with this. He helped write. Oh, we got more people. Yeah, it tends to build up a little bit when people come on and see what's going on here. They're pushing against. If you have any friends who'd like to watch it, I'm streaming on YouTube. I put the link there as well under the comment section of here, the spaces. I believe you should see that, and you can see me scrolling through the quotes. And one day maybe I'll be able to do that on Twitter. So Article 19 in New Jersey, that Witherspoon was in favor of, obviously complicates matters for the post-World War II consensus on socio-political and religious relations. But it's a stubborn fact that Witherspoon and others helped write this. A few articles later, an important point of law was reiterated in the New Jersey Constitution of Witherspoon and his associates. And here we have 22 of the article, that the common law of England, as well as so much of the statute law as have been heretofore practiced in this colony, shall still remain in force until they shall be altered by future law of the legislature. Common law of England was stated and said, this is what we are following. This is the American way of doing things. We've lost this because it changed about 100 years ago. Although it's still technically on the books in the judicial rulings. Most people don't know that from SCOTUS, Judges, Kent, and Story, early 1800s onward, Christianity was assumed as, quote, part and parcel of the common law in America. Here's the full quote from Stuart Banner in Law and History Review. 19th century American judges and lawyers often claimed that Christianity was part of the common law. From Kent and Story in the early part of the century to Cooley and Tiedemann toward the end, the maxim that, quote, Christianity is part and parcel of the common law, end quote, or some variant thereof, was heard so often that later commentators could refer to it as a matter, quote, decided over and over again. One which, quote, text writers have reiterated and courts have affirmed, end quote. The maxim even received an endorsement of sorts from the Supreme Court, which in 1844 affirmed that, quote, the Christian religion is part of the common law of Pennsylvania. This is not common knowledge. No one talks about this. We want to talk about these things and try to understand how the American confession fits in the American milieu. This is how it fits. Witherspoon understood common law. Witherspoon helped write the Constitution. And he's saying, and the rest of the Presbyterians there, this is what we want. We want Protestants to be protected. We want Protestants as leaders in our society here, and we want to follow the common law, which has its basis in assumed Christian ethics. Now, Sunday laws were not the only explicitly religious supporting laws of the land. There were numerous blasphemy laws. This is from Harvard Review. I don't get my quotes from parachurch ministries. There's parachurch ministries are trying to push for early America and things like that, and they're kind of sloppy. Until well into the 20th century, American law recognized blasphemy as prescribable speech. The black letter rule was clear. Constitutional liberty entailed a right to articulate views on religion, but not a right to commit blasphemy. And it continues on, going into details. And these laws, unfortunately, again, changed, as many things did, in the 20th century. Well into the 20th century, American law Now to Witherspoon, which is, he spends the latter part of the section there in his essay on the Gospel Coalition on Witherspoon, and references some quotes from him and his general approach to things, and that's true. But what you need to do is dig into what he had here in his lectures on moral philosophy, which I have before us, when he talks, just briefly, it's a very brief lecture notes, more or less. In point 3, he expresses with respect to the relationship of religion, not church, not the institution as such, so that's assumed, but religion, i.e. Christianity, and the state. Witherspoon writes, "The magistrate may enact laws for the punishment of acts of profanity and impiety." Lecture notes, more or less. Point 3. There you go. That would be blasphemy laws, it would be Sunday laws, and other such laws. "The different sentiments of men in religion ought not by any means," he writes, "to encourage or give a sanction to such acts as any of them count profane." And so, under the question of the relationship between church and religion, state and religion, Witherspoon allows a magistrate to punish acts of profanity and impiety, his words. And I can see no reason, I don't think anybody would take it seriously, that would not include Sunday and blasphemy laws that existed at the time in such states as New Jersey and all the colonies. Elsewhere, Witherspoon declared, "Whoever is an avowed enemy to God, I scruple not to call him an enemy to his country." This is in the book on the biography of Witherspoon with respect to politics and religion. It's a very good book to read or have on your bookshelf. The book Religion and the American Constitutional Experiment by Jonas Robisher, Professor of Law and Ethics, John Witt, Jr. He's written a lot of books. I studied this matter of the influence of Christianity upon early American law and society almost 20 years ago. I've got dozens of books, essays, and whatnot. Scholarly works on this matter. John Witt's one of the big names. He explains well this foreign context and the assumptions of religion and Christianity in the American milieu. He points out the common assumptions of that time period that enlightens the work of our Presbyterian fathers. Quote, "In the 18th century, the founders recognized and celebrated a plurality of Protestant Christian faiths." You know, I should probably stop right here. I probably said at the beginning, it's kind of hard because this is the speech, the spaces on Twitter speech. I can't put any text here in the area that you can ask questions. I don't know if you have your microphone on, but or ask questions in the Twitter stream. In the 18th century, the founders recognized and celebrated a plurality of Protestant Christian faiths. When pressed as to how much further to extend recognized religion and its attendant constitutional protection, there was minor disagreement. Some set the legal line at Protestantism, others at Christianity in general, thereby including Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, and still others at theism, thereby including Jews, Muslims, and deists. But few founders writing on the religious rights and liberties argued seriously about extending constitutional protection to others by including non-Western religious traditions practiced by, for example, African slaves or Native American tribes, let alone non-theistic traditions like Buddhism. These were not even on the horizon, and the other matters were barely ever talked about, like the Jews, Muslims, and deists. The bulk of them were assuming they were in 13 colonies, of course, so very inconsistent practice. Christianity, perhaps Catholics at the most, and certainly the vast majority, Protestantism all the way. Thus, talk about religious freedom in the mouth of our forefathers is different than when politicians or many pastors speak of it today. To return to Witherspoon, we find that he was not the only one who allowed a robust moral approach in the space between establishmentarianism and whatever secular version some in the church promote today. We read similar concern and language from the Presbytery of Hanover. This is really something interesting here. This is one of the big presbyteries at the time, very influential. And they more or less said it is upon this principle alone of morality and Christianity relationship as it is, in our opinion, that a legislative body has a right to interfere in religion at all, and of consequence we suppose that this interference ought only to extend to the preserving of the public worship of the deity and the supporting of institutions for inculcating the great fundamental principles of all religion, without which society could not easily exist. That should have been quoted in the TGC article. This leads us to the Westminster Standards, and I do not plan to give on in-depth analysis, but to highlight things that are easily forgotten. For example, Westminster Larger Catechism question 191, where we read, "What do we pray for in the second petition?" In the second petition, which is, "Thy kingdom come," acknowledging ourselves and all mankind to be by nature under the dominion of sin and Satan, we pray that the kingdom of sin and Satan may be destroyed, the gospel propagated throughout the world, the Jews called, the fullness of the Gentiles brought in, the church furnished with all gospel officers and ordinances, purged from corruption, countenanced and maintained by the civil magistrate. This is the American edition of the Westminster Larger Catechism. Again, that should have been in the essay, because this is part of the larger dialogue that we're supposed to be talking about these matters, although they are still abstract and not to be settled anytime soon. That word there, countenanced, as defined by the original Webster, no Webster dictionary you can find online, to support, aid, patronage, encouragement, favor in promoting and maintaining a person or cause. It is a providence of the magistrate to give countenance to piety and virtue. Let religion enjoy the countenance of the laws. Give no countenance to violations of moral duty, he gives as examples. So this is stronger than the language of allow or permit, which is not anywhere in our confession of the church to do her duty. And it fits the early American practices and expectations that I just highlighted before. At any rate, such practices and statements show us that there is elbow room for a healthy and mutual relationship between Christianity and the state if we wish to follow the practices of our forefathers, and it doesn't have to entail establishment. Tarianism. Given the unmitigated social and political disasters that is the America of 2024, there are more and more reasons for us to at least return to better approach for our forefathers, both ecclesiastical and political. Meanwhile, do what you can to avoid profaning God's name and works. Uphold the Lord's Day in your family, even in your employment if you can. We are in a defensive position, trying to keep our heads down while working peaceably with an increasingly hostile world that would rob us of our inheritance. If you are a church leader, encourage your people to stay holy and work hard for their family as well as their community and state so that we can be an example of righteousness to the world. If you are a church member, voting and petitioning and other earthly means are good. Social media can be used to promote the truth. Do what you can to promote and maintain virtue in America and in your little domain, and support good churches and ministries. But given our limited options in society and politics, we need to especially work to keep the church pure, reject compromise with the gay mafia, and uphold the law and the gospel. I do not know the future, but as a man I see dark times coming upon us. Yet even if we lose here, we will never be forsaken by our Father. Cling to Christ, and I'll let you do. Amen. Given our limited options in society and politics. Any questions? I don't know how much you heard. Reject compromise with the gay mafia and uphold the law and the gospel. Or discussion. I'm willing to talk a little bit. I plan on doing only half-hour bits. Yet even if we lose here, we will never be forsaken by our Father. Again, it's on YouTube. You can see my face. You can see the quotes I'm scrolling through there. Questions? I don't know how much you heard. And I'll do this maybe once a week or so. Or discussion. So 3 times a month. I plan on doing only half-hour bits. Maybe Thursday's better, Tuesday, I don't know. It seemed to work out too well Tuesday. Again, it's on. There's a 12-second delay. You can see my face. So let me wait 12 seconds to see if anybody says anything, then I'll end. I'll do this maybe once a week or so. Or discussion. So 3 times a month. Maybe Thursday's better, Tuesday, I don't know. It seemed to work out too well Tuesday. Again, it's on.
Hey, Pastor Mathis, thank you so much for doing this. Please keep doing it. We don't have too many people in this space, and I think it's very important and very helpful. My question for you is, who do you like right now? Who other people who are talking about this? We have Stephen Wolfe. We've got the Contra Mundum guys. There's a couple other people talking about this. Is there anybody who you would recommend?
So the question is for you on YouTube, if you can't hear him. He's asking if I recommend anybody on these matters. He mentioned Stephen Wolfe. Contra Mundum. Who's Contra Mundum? I've not read Stephen Wolfe's book. It came out about a year before I finish my book, and I've been pushing my book, of course, right now. I don't know much about Contra Mundum, so I don't have an answer for you.
That's okay. Contra Mundum is Andrew Isker. He wrote a
Oh,
book called
okay.
Crash. Yes. He's doing a podcast called Contra Mundum with another guy who's really good on these issues. So I was just wondering if you have spoken to anybody else or working
Yeah.
with anybody else right now.
No, I have not. You can just call me a loner. I'm older in this space. I think a lot of you guys are younger. I mean, 20s and 30s, maybe some 40s. I'm 52, right? So I'm easily 12 years older than some of the older people in this group. I don't listen to podcasts. I'm busy doing other things. I don't have time for that. I've done a lot of my own research in this matter. For example, I mentioned that earlier if you weren't here. I've got dozens of books on the influence of Christianity and early legal thought and society in early America, and essays and whatnot. So I was aware of a lot of this stuff. That's why I had some of this quote and was able to interact with DeYoung's essay. And hopefully it will help others to get an idea that there is a lot more going on than just simply quoting the confession. The confession assumes the American context. Witherspoon was in New Jersey, and you heard all that. So, yeah, I don't know anybody else. You have to keep half an eye on people and be careful, of course, not to get too sucked up into people. It's better to have a local pastor, which I know can be hard. I think we're running out of a lot more reliable pastors than we realize. I visited Germany 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now, back when it was worth visiting, I guess. And there was nothing. There were no Reformed churches in southern Germany to go to speak of. So that's Munich area. And we just found an expatriate church. So some Baptist, Reformed kind of Baptist church that all the Americans go to. It's a sad place, European scene. I know others in England and like, and America's turning that way, unfortunately.
It is, Pastor Mathis, and that's kind of why I brought it up because I think your knowledge is very helpful, and I'm a little bit more aware of sort of what's going on right now in the younger guys. I think Stephen Wolf
Mm-hmm.
is probably closest to where you're at, his
Oh, yeah.
project, and so I don't know. I think it would be helpful because I haven't heard as much from you. It would be helpful maybe to have you on, maybe on one of their podcasts or something, so you could share some of this because I
Mm-hmm.
think your expertise that is part of the argument. You know, the American tradition, the American heritage is a big part of the argument of the modern day Christian nationalists. So
Oh, yeah.
what you're talking about today
Yeah,
is
his
it's
specialty,
very
I guess,
helpful.
would be more of the philosophical and political connection there in his book. Like I said, I hadn't read the book. My angle is just the historical section. I really like history, and then the theology, tying the theology there as well. And I've been working on that on my own. So if there's any parallel to him, it was independent of Stefan in these matters, which I think it would go to show if any overlap there. I think I'm right, of course, and to the extent that he's right with me shows how public and truth a lot of these things are, and they can be analyzed publicly. They're not just these obscure matters. The relationship between the church, relationship between families and individuals and society and legal matters is all involves God's moral law. We break the moral law, therefore the gospel comes along. And so as a minister of the gospel and of the law, but especially the gospel, I have to be aware of the law and its function, not only to bring judgment and warning to people that they're on their way to hell and they've broken the law, but to live a Christian life, sanctification. And so my intersection, my specialty in this matter would be, I believe, the issue of applying God's law to society. I don't mean all the fine detail points of should I have speed limit signs here or there, although I've talked about that. A lot of those particular details depend on particulars, but there are general principles, i.e. protecting life, for example. But the circumstances are significant. We tend to have this approach to the law of God of a one-size-fits-all thing approach to things, but a lot of it's circumstantial. How do you apply protecting life when you have all these intersecting other commandments of God's and issues before us? So, yeah, thank you. Good question. Thank you for the encouragement. I'm glad you're here. And yeah, I'll keep doing it. I got nothing to lose. I'm a small church. There's not a lot of, like I said, people here in the space here. And it's one way to reach out. The younger generation is really much online compared to people older than me, my generation and older, so older Gen X and even the boomers. And one way to grow the church is to reach out, and this is one way to reach out. So hopefully it'll work one day in God's providence. Thank you, gentlemen, and any gentle ladies perhaps in the background, and have a blessed night. Oh, someone speaking. Someone just a lady just joined. I was just going to end. Did you have a question? Hey. Well, it's recorded, it's saved, it'll be online, you can listen to it, and you can also, she just left, and she can also find it on YouTube. So pass it around, guys. Take care. Have a good night.